Hey, good morning, all. Joshua Severe Weather. Happy Thursday to you. We have passed summer solstice, and now the days are going to keep getting shorter in the Northern Hemisphere. The nights will get longer. Yesterday was the longest day of the year. Where I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, we didn't even see the sun, so it didn't really matter. But we are well into the summer season here and very busy in the tropics, and also seeing quite a bit of more severe weather across the plains and the foothills of the Rockies. So I'm going to spend most of this video chatting about what's going on in the tropics, why it's so active, what threats we may have, and what's to come in the next couple of weeks. And then the last part of my video, I'm going to talk about the next few days and the threat for severe weather and flooding in many parts of the United States, where it has been a super hyperactive month of June, more active than we would typically see. So here is a look at our headlines for today. Bret is actually a pretty strong tropical storm nearing hurricane strength. And we're looking at landfall here overnight tonight across the northern Leeward Islands. There is still a window where this could marginally become a hurricane. So we now have some hurricane watches, and I'm going to get into more of that. We also now have a new tropical depression, which is certainly not unexpected, Tropical Depression 4, which I do believe will get upgraded to Tropical Storm Cindy. While both of these storms are not an immediate threat to the United States and probably won't be, it is remarkable to see what could be two named storms east of the islands in the month of June. That has never happened. So I'm not just throwing stuff on the map saying, hey, look at me. This is actually some unprecedented weather in the tropics. So something I'm definitely monitoring for you guys. We have a couple of other areas I'll be watching. Another wave came off of Africa a couple days ago that is not really developing right now, but could become a future low here over the central Atlantic, something that we'll have to watch next week. And on the Pacific side of things are about to get busy off of the Mexican Riviera and over the far eastern Pacific. Not a threat to the United States, but we know people do travel to the Riviera and the Baja, and obviously we're going to be monitoring those areas as well. Here's why things are so busy across the Atlantic. Let me pull up my cursor so we can show you kind of what's going on. The main development region here is running about 2 to 3 degrees Celsius above average, or even parts of the far northeast Atlantic that are running almost 5 degrees Celsius above average. Is the entire world running above average? Depends on what your sliding scale for average is. I mean, we definitely have areas that are below average off the eastern seaboard, and you can't see it on the map here, but off of the Baja and California. So there is some balance there as well. But the areas where our tropical systems definitely are coming from Africa, we see a very favorable spot for storms to develop, and that's why we're seeing an active storm path. We just see significant areas of warmer than average temperatures that you would typically see during the month of August, when this area tends to be towards the peak of the hurricane season. We see the most activity in August and into the month of September. So very interesting stuff here. And as we look at the last week or so, every time I switch my cursor to the next screen, it brings my cursor off the map. But as we see here over the last week, this area continues to warm. Over the last 7 days, it's warmed about 1 degree Celsius. So conditions, assuming no strong wind shear in here, will continue to favor seeing waves coming off of Africa. It's not like things are going to slow down here just because we only have 2 storms on the map. I expect that as we head towards July, we're still going to see activity across this area. We are seeing some warming off the East Coast, especially in the Southwest Atlantic. So this is pretty common for this time of the year. These waters are still warming up and will continue to do so into September. Whether or not we have a La Nina or an El Nino, we do have an El Nino. So certainly there will be more opportunities for activity to form in here. But right now there are no immediate threats close to land at this point. Also over the Pacific, we're seeing warming in here and less wind shear, which would favor more development as well. So that's why we're seeing activity picking up. Let's get into some more details here. Here is the water vapor loop right now that shows you moisture in place. And we've got a large subtropical high right here. We've got a record-breaking high over Mexico. That's why it's so hot across Texas and Mexico right now. Here's Tropical Storm Bret. You can see it's grown in size. This is our next tropical storm. Depression 4 right now should be Cindy in the next 12 hours. Then we've got a wave here that I'm going to watch. It's very disorganized at this point. Additional waves coming across here. We do have a flare up over the gyre here over Central America, but wind shear very strong here out of the north and west. that is going to effectively kill any kind of circulation center we may see. And eventually that wind shear is going to impact Bret as it moves into the Caribbean Sea, and maybe Cindy as well as it moves up into the Southwest Atlantic. Large upper level low pressure system. You can see that spinning near Nashville, Tennessee. It is going to continue slowly east and northeast. Another system diving up and over the ridge here into the plains, and that once again is going to cut off into a big low pressure trough next week. So very favorable conditions for some development in this part of the Atlantic. Very unfavorable over here due to dry air. Very unfavorable over here due to wind shear. So you really need to have a combination of low wind shear as well as warm surface temperatures on the ocean to see things develop. So we do have just a narrow window where things are going to develop, and that's here over the main development region, as you would expect in August, but not in June. Here's a look at the water vapor image. You can see this is future Cindy over here. This is our next wave southwest of the islands, the Cape Verde Islands. A lot of dry air north of it, so I don't think we're going to see development over the next few days, but there are a couple more waves lined up here across Africa. So all of these are going to be disorganized, which you would expect in June, but the fact that we have so much going on this time of the year certainly raises an eyebrow. I'll keep watching it for you guys here. All right, Tropical Storm Bret, up to 70 miles per hour this morning. There's a small window where it could get over 74 to a hurricane. We do have a hurricane hunter flying in right now. At the end of this video, I'll show you what the latest date is. I'm not going to show you now because it's not quite to the center. But you can see we do have tropical storm warnings, hurricane watch now, and tropical storm watches. Now, as the storm tracks into the Caribbean here tomorrow, it will have reached its peak. Wind shear is going to pick up. We'll start to see some weakening, and then more steady weakening as we get to Friday night and Saturday over the central Caribbean. The storm's moving quickly into what we call the graveyard, where stronger wind shear over the central Caribbean is going to lead to its eventual demise here this weekend. So rather than strengthening and threatening Central America or Cuba or any of these islands or even the U.S., we see a weakening storm system, which is good news. Here's a current map of the watches and warnings. We can see now a hurricane watch posted for St. Lucia, where we could potentially, if this storm does strengthen just a bit more, see a period of brief hurricane force winds on St. Lucia. We also have a tropical storm warning there. We have a tropical storm warning as well for Martinique and for Dominica, and we have a tropical storm watch for Barbados and for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Most of the winds are on the north and eastern side of the system. That's why we see it weighted to where we have more warnings to the north of the track versus to the south. So Barbados may just get a glancing blow. St. Lucia, though, could take the storm full on here overnight tonight, first thing tomorrow morning. And there's certainly a brief window where it could become a hurricane, even though models aren't explicitly stating that. Here's a look at the visible satellite. You can see we still have wind shear off to the west of our storm system. You can kind of see these lower cloud elements in here, some light to moderate westerly wind shear. So the actual center is kind of on the western side of our storms, but we see significant thunderstorm flare-ups in here, and I'll show you that on the visible, on the infrared. And some of these are sustaining winds that are close to hurricane force. So even though not the entire storm system's got an eye wall or anything like that forming, we still do have some bursts where we can get to that hurricane force, or at least strong tropical storm force. Here's a look at, whoops, let me get that off the map for you guys. Here's a look at the thunderstorms, and we can see the low-level center is kind of in here, and all the storms are still weighted to the north and east of the center. But as this track continues in this way, well, those storms are going to be taking aim at these islands and here. So we definitely could see a period of very rough weather here tonight. Here's a look at our forecast track probability of depression. You can see this is Saturday night and then Sunday, and the chances start lowering as we get into Sunday, and just a very low chance that we might still see a depression south of Jamaica, south of the Caymans, and maybe touching the northeast coast of Nicaragua or the southeast coast of Honduras. But no threat to see this holding together and moving into the Gulf at this point. Ensembles do mostly take it west between Jamaica and Honduras, but really at this point, we're likely seeing this thing falling apart into an open wave. Strong wind shear is going to keep the storms on the eastern side of the center, and eventually will continue to blow them off and lead to a weakening and maybe rapidly weakening system here over the weekend. If the storm moisture holds together, then maybe it tracks towards Mexico and Belize, but no threat to the United States. These models here I'm discounting. I just don't see it tracking in this direction. There's really really some bias that's involved here. And you can see on the ensembles, the GFS ensembles all generally take it westward towards Honduras and Nicaragua. A couple of outlying solutions that I would not really worry about at this point. Again, I would not worry about this one solution of the Euro that turns it north towards Florida. There's just a lot of wind shear. It's going to be really tough to get something like that to happen. More than likely, it's dissipating or even heading over to the Pacific side, and maybe it'll have a better chance at developing in the Pacific here later next week or next weekend. Intensity forecast. Actually, all of our models, while they do have it as a strong tropical storm, do not intensify it to hurricane strength. This is an outlier. I'm discounting it. And in general, you look at a weakening trend here, and in about 72 hours, we're going to have what's maybe a dying tropical storm or even depression. So that puts us here at Sunday morning, where we've got a storm that's pretty much fizzling and then probably opening up into a wave by Sunday night. So you can see why here. This is wind shear, and the greens are favorable wind shear for development. Yellows are moderate, and reds indicate stronger wind shear. This is the center of Bret, so it's actually getting into the reds here as it moves in this direction. Right now, it's kind of marginal. This is future Cindy, which is actually in a good spot for slow development as we see low wind shear, but as it continues in this direction, it will encounter more wind shear. By the time it gets up into here, which I'll show you in a little bit, it's going to probably stop strengthening and may begin a weakening trend. But this is the graveyard here, the Central Caribbean. 40 to 50 knots of wind shear will continue to blow storms off of the top of the system and lead to weakening. So good news there for us that are closer to the United States, Mexico, and Cuba, in that we are going to have wind shear kind of protecting us from any kind of favorable development. All right, real quick, we'll look at wind gusts. And you can see this is Bret. This will be future Cindy. The strongest winds will go right through the middle of the Leeward Islands. And then for Cindy, they're going to stay well north and east of the islands, according to this, and then weaken as we get into the middle of next week. Here's a closer look at miles per hour. We can see wind gusts maybe of 50 to 60 miles per hour on St. Lucia and maybe Martinique as well, kind of sliding through the gap here. And then as we get beyond, we'll see the strongest wind gust kind of fades well south of Puerto Rico, north of Aruba, and then a weakening trend beyond that. Next storm is Cindy, and right now tropical depression, but predicted to be a storm here later today. Not predicted to become a hurricane, and probably won't, but I would never say never, as we sometimes see bursts here. But the difference between Cindy and Bret is that Cindy is going to make a right turn as a trough comes down and starts to pick it up and turn it northward. And if you're in Bermuda, you definitely want to keep an eye on this. But notice the forecast early next week shows a weakening trend back to a depression. That's going to be due to stronger wind shear as an upper level trough drops down. So while we do need to watch in Bermuda, we may have something that's weakening or falling apart pretty quickly, but there's more than 7 days between now and then, so we've got some time to watch. You can see things have started to come alive here with our depression. I think it may be close to tropical storm strength. We may have a storm later this morning, but we see a lot of dry air coming in on the south and east side of the system, but a pretty well-wrapped system here. So this looks a little bit healthier, and you can see on the infrared we've had sustained thunderstorms. So this very well could be a tropical storm very soon here. But notice how quickly it's moving east and those storms are kind of collapsing. It is feeling a little bit of wind shear, a little bit of surrounding dry air, and you can kind of see lower clouds that are actually coming in from the north and east here. So not going to say it's not a healthy system, but certainly not one that looks like it's going to intensify quickly. Here's the risk of it having tropical depression winds or greater on the GFS ensemble. And by the time we get to next Tuesday and Wednesday, you can see we lose really, for the most part, a chance of having a depression, except there are a couple of ensembles later next week that show kind of an outside chance of that near or just to the east of Bermuda. Tropical storm intensity, again, it shows actually, kind of interestingly, a system here that's weakening to a depression, and then a couple of ensemble members show it starting to kind of just sit here and maybe try to regenerate or re-strengthen slowly by the end of next week. So we're talking next Friday. It's 8 days out, a lot of uncertainty at that point. But overall, all of our models take it to the east of the islands, of the Virgin Islands and of the northern Leeward Islands. But we do see, just one model that tries to, the H-WRF, which has not done very well, by the way, continues to try to take it closer. But overall, I think this is going to end up missing to the right. That could still change, but overall, that's what we're looking at. The reason why is we've got a trough that's going to pick it up and turn it. Here's Bermuda right here. Again, let me get my cursor back up for you guys to see. This is Bermuda right here. So we do see several clusters that get close to Bermuda. It's a small target, but one that's kind of in the middle of things. So we're going to keep an eye on that towards the end of next week. However, I don't think we're looking at a hurricane at that point. We're looking at maybe a depression or a lower end tropical storm or even a remnant low. Now, beyond that, the European does try to hold this together and bring it up towards Atlantic Canada. There is one solution that tries to wrap it back in New England. Again, way too soon to even see if that's even going to be a case. More than likely, it's either dying around here or it's just a low pressure that's losing tropical characteristics, but could impact Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, or it may even turn right and affect more of Newfoundland. And that's not going to even be until the very end of June, beginning of July. Overall, except for this purple outlier, which again has not done well, the H-Wharf, we see a tropical storm likely here by the end of the day today or tonight, and strengthening up until about Saturday morning, and then holding steady, and then weakening beyond that later this weekend into next week as wind shear increases. Here's a look at the GFS model, just so you guys can see kind of an overall track here. And you can see Bret is weakening by the time it gets over between Jamaica and Honduras. Cindy begins to weaken as well as we get into early next week. But the GFS, and this is the only model that's doing it, does show it holding together, surviving the wind shear, and then strengthening next Wednesday and Thursday, perhaps into a hurricane. This is Bermuda, so it's not far to the right of Bermuda, and then weakening as it races off across New England here by July 1st. That is the first Saturday of the month of July. So this is the latest GFS, but the GFS tends to have some model bias where it strengthens things in the longer term, and that typically doesn't seem to work out. In fact, if you guys remember a couple weeks ago, today's the 22nd, we were supposed to have a hurricane hitting either Houston or Florida. That obviously has not happened. So don't get too caught up in this intensity forecast at this point. Just keep an eye on it. We're going to have more than a week to keep an eye on things. Here is the European model. You can see Bret dying here by the time it gets south of Jamaica. Here's Cindy, and the European actually kills it pretty much south of Bermuda, and the remnant low actually kind of goes just to the west of Bermuda. The next system that we're going to keep an eye on, the European does not develop it at all. It just has some lower pressure. The GFS doesn't really develop it either. We just have some lower pressure, so no immediate threats coming off of Africa behind these two systems. But the Canadian, which is not my favorite tropical model, but it is showing something, has Bret dying here south of Jamaica. It has Cindy, and then it has some slow development late this weekend into maybe a depression by early next week. This would be next Monday evening. So Bret is gone. This is Cindy, which is dying, and then this is potential Dawn or Tropical Depression 5, depending on what happens, following a very similar track to Bret. By the way, it's got some more development coming off of Africa, and I think that's very possible, but we've got more than a week. This would not even impact the islands until next Wednesday night. So we've got about 6 to 7 days before any potential future impact here. It does absorb Cindy into this front that moves off the East Coast here later next week, so no threat to Canada at that point. The Icon, the German model, takes Bret across the southern and central Caribbean. Here's Cindy, and you can see, again, not much disagreement. Here's the next system, which the Icon keeps pretty weak and pretty low, but does bring to the islands north of Barbados and towards Dominica and Martinique here next Wednesday. It does try to hold together the remains of Bret as a very weak system, moving towards the Yucatan and moving into Mexico. This is Cindy. It's actually got Cindy hitting near or just east of Bermuda here next Thursday as a very weak system. So a low-end tropical storm or depression. But if it does hold together around here, we obviously need to keep a close eye on it. GFS, big time outlier. Other models, weak system. I want to trust the other models at this point. And then nothing else coming off of Africa that looks like it'll develop beyond this wave, which may or may not try to become Dawn as we get towards next Tuesday and Wednesday. Even though the Icon takes us down towards the Yucatan, it's probably going to fall apart. We're just going to have some tropical moisture in the Western Gulf towards the following weekend. Here's a look real quick at our tropical models. This is Bret. You can see the HAFS weakens it pretty significantly. Here's Cindy, which develops and then slowly starts weakening as we get to this weekend. And then as we look at the Pacific side of things, we do have potentially at least one, maybe even two systems try to develop, but not until later next week. A high likelihood that we have a named storm here on the Pacific side, for the first time. I didn't even look at the list of names, but you can see it's getting kind of close to the Riviera. So we're going to keep an eye on it here. Here's the tropical storm forecast. May not even become a tropical storm until it's pulling away from Mexico late next week. And hurricane probabilities right now are not being predicted, but I think that's possible. Look at the GFS in the Pacific. We see some development, and I think this is developing it way too fast here. It's got a tropical storm next Monday night, and then very quickly, rapidly intensifying into a stronger hurricane, and then moving well away from Cabo San Lucas and the Baja Peninsula. And then it's got another system developing here behind it. And again, very uncertain at this point, but something we'll keep an eye on. Certainly the East Pacific is going to get more active, whereas the Gulf is going to stay somewhat quiet here at the beginning of July. The European, as it typically does not develop things very quickly, but does have at least one named storm and maybe a second one following behind it, getting swallowed up by the first one. The Canadian model, kind of in between the two, it does have this becoming a tropical storm next Tuesday and Wednesday, but not a hurricane. The next system, it actually shows a better chance of development. They're going to be close to the Mexican Riviera, so I'm going to have to watch them for you guys. The Icon model does kind of trend this pretty quickly more to what the GFS has. It's got a strong storm here next Tuesday and Wednesday, so a depression may form Sunday or Monday, and it may be a hurricane just 24 to 48 hours later if this model is right and if the GFS is right. So we'll keep an eye on that for you guys. Now moving to the U.S., flooding continues here over portions of the Carolinas down to Georgia and Florida. It's raining hard here in Raleigh. We also continue to see a threat for some flooding in the high plains and east of the Rockies here. Dangerous heat continues over Texas, spreading north and east in Oklahoma and Louisiana. Record heat expected again in south and central Texas. We were into the 110s here, and southern New Mexico also getting that extreme heat. The rest of the country, relatively quiet. We did have multiple complexes of storms that produced tornadoes last night and late in the day yesterday over northeast Colorado. We actually had hail at Red Rocks where there was a concert. I don't know why they didn't stop it, but people were injured by hail. Some were taken to the hospital. We also, unfortunately, had a lot of destruction across northwest Texas, including the Panhandle, and one reported tornado which brought fatalities to the Matador area. That is between Lubbock and Childress, Texas. You can see this storm on satellite from Colin Gross, a very high storm that produced a violent tornado. We don't know what the EF is on it, probably a 3, but unfortunately there were fatalities. Today will not be as active. We're not going to see a strong complex moving through, but the same areas are under the gun. Slight risk for severe weather. There is a threat for tornadoes over far northwestern Texas, eastern New Mexico, and up into Wyoming. There's also a threat for severe wind across this area and very large hail across this entire area. So if people are heading to Red Rocks, again, they're going to have hail to deal with here this evening. We also have an area I'm focusing on, the southeast coast from northern Florida into North Carolina, where there is going to be some enhancement of wind shear, and I'm going to show you details on that. But we could see a few tornadoes in here and locally strong winds as well, a threat for some hail over the eastern Florida peninsula. So an active day expected here. Tomorrow, a very active day over the entire high plains, where there will be threats for tornadoes, strong winds, and very large hail. As we get to Saturday, we'll quiet down in this area. Trough will move northeast and bring severe weather into the Missouri Valley, including Omaha and Kansas City and Des Moines. It'll be busy on the East Coast, but no organized severe weather. And then as we get to Sunday, we are looking at potential severe weather where we need the rain over the Ohio Valley states up into central Indiana. Right now, no predictable areas for Monday, but I do think we're going to have a couple areas to keep an eye on. Actually, parts of the lower Mississippi Valley in the southeast could be busy early Monday, as well as parts of Ohio into western PA, but we're a little bit farther out at that point. Sorry about that. GFS shows our low pressure system over the east, next storm moving into the plains here over the weekend. And you can see on the southern tail of it, there's actually a complex of storms that I think could bring some severe wind back into Arkansas, northern Mississippi, western Tennessee, maybe down into central and southern parts of Mississippi and Alabama overnight Sunday night. I'm going to be watching that complex for you guys here. Storm Prediction Center not predicting it yet. That doesn't mean they won't. At the same time, our surface low is deepening over Lake Michigan and moving up towards Lake Huron. That's going to bring some needed rainfall to Michigan and Ohio, maybe some strong storms. And then we're looking at maybe some stronger storms over the Eastern U.S. here Monday and Monday night. And then that moves away slowly on Tuesday and Wednesday. We still have cool, unsettled weather for the Northeast. And the heat builds right back in here next week over the southern and central plains. Quick look at Texas and the Southern Plains, quieter this morning, then turning busy again late today over New Mexico and over West Texas. We will potentially see some big storms again here overnight tonight, but not as organized a complex. What's left will still be around into Oklahoma tomorrow morning, dissipating, and could regenerate storms near and south of Dallas as we get into Friday afternoon. This forecast probably will change as it's the HRRR model, and we will probably see changes in the future runs, but certainly keep an eye on things here. Taking a look at the Northern Plains, we are going to be busy over the next several days. We are going to see development over Wyoming and western South Dakota here late today and then into this evening. More storms are expected here tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow night, moving through the Dakotas and northern parts of Nebraska. And then our busiest day is going to be Saturday as all this shifts east, and we may potentially have issues in Omaha for the College World Series. As we look farther east into Sunday, we see what could be some pretty nasty lightning strikes over Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota early in the day on Sunday, really Saturday night, but then spreading into Illinois and Wisconsin and Indiana here Sunday afternoon. So prepare for storms and maybe some heavy rain in some of these over Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, eventually shifting into Ohio and Michigan here late Sunday night and into the day on Monday. Here's a look at the Northeast. And as these storms continue to move east, we see active weather over the Lake Erie region into West Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania here on Monday. We may see some isolated severe weather Monday night, Tuesday morning across the Delaware Valley, and then things will slowly dissipate with leftover scattered showers and storms Tuesday, Wednesday, into Thursday. Here's the Southeast. We're going to stay pretty busy here east of Alabama, so Georgia, Florida, very busy here this afternoon. The Carolinas are going to be very busy as well. We could see severe weather. Slow-moving storms are going to produce a flood threat here. We see more storms for the day tomorrow in the eastern Carolinas, and we'll again have storms regenerating with the heating of the day over parts of the southeast, including some isolated pop-ups here in Louisiana. This model does not go beyond tomorrow evening, so the weekend is not shown on here, but I do think we're going to have this complex that forms over Arkansas and Mississippi, with storms popping up later Sunday, continuing south and east, maybe an organized complex here Sunday night, early on Monday. Leftover boundaries will lead to regenerating storms later Monday into Monday night here in the southeast. And of course, Florida is going to stay unsettled. Let's look real quick at the Carolinas and our severe threat today. We do have a boundary that's draped across this area. It's shifting inland. So our dew points are climbing into the 70s in Raleigh, well into the 70s in eastern North Carolina and South Carolina. And that boundary continues to shift north and west. So moisture air is getting farther inland, penetrating areas that have been cloudy and kind of cool and wet here over the last couple of days. And you can see this is our storm fuel, the Cape, on the NAM, and it is climbing to higher rates than what we've seen all week in the eastern half of North Carolina, South Carolina, and southeast Georgia. It is also climbing in southeastern Virginia here. So we do have increased storm fuel. We may see a little bit of sun here breaking through, and that will increase our chances to see storms popping up. And tomorrow we'll also have quite a bit of storm fuel across the same areas and even areas farther west. So while we've had wet weather and heavy rainfall, we do see on the map potentially more organized storms developing here this afternoon. Once our big area of rain lifts north, we see widespread showers and storms firing up this afternoon. Some of them could turn intense. We could see a few isolated tornadoes, strong winds, and hail with these storms. And then we're going to do it again here tomorrow with additional showers and storms firing up in the warm sector. Our upper low is here, but all the heating is going to be south and east of it. We could even see some heavy storms over Maryland and eastern Pennsylvania during the afternoon tomorrow. So a very unsettled path. Storm track here over the next 2 days. Saturday looks less unsettled, but it'll be sunnier and warmer, and so we could see additional storm development. Where we could potentially see rotation, according to the NAM model, today will be from eastern Georgia through the Midlands and eastern South Carolina, including Georgetown, Murrells Inlet, and Myrtle Beach, maybe around Raleigh, Durham, and more likely along and east of 95 all the way up into southeast Virginia. During the day tomorrow, we see a few more storm tracks that could be rotating as well. And finally, looking farther south, we do have a severe threat across north central parts of Florida and southern Georgia this afternoon, some rotating storms possible. And again, tomorrow we see quite a bit of activity over the Space Coast, Orlando area, and maybe even over the Tampa Bay area. Looking closer to the northeast here, we see rounds of rain moving north and east over the next 24 hours, then scattered showers and storms tomorrow over New York City, Philadelphia, and surrounding areas. Some of these could produce some hail and locally heavy rainfall, and we'll continue to have unsettled weather this weekend as all of this slowly lifts north and east across the St. Lawrence Valley and into western New England. There will be a flood threat today across much of the southeast. It's a slight risk. Same goes for the central and northern plains. Tomorrow, the Great Plains and Northern Rockies have a flood threat. We continue to have heavy rain possible over parts of the eastern and southern United States. On Saturday, improvement over the southeast, but a threat for some flooding over the northeast and a bigger threat across the north central U.S. and the prairies of Canada. By Sunday, same areas are going to continue to have at least a marginal risk of flash flooding. And then Monday, we look for a higher chance of potential flooding from Alabama and Georgia all the way up into southeastern Canada as things get very active with our approaching front. Here's why. You'll see rain totals are going to climb very quickly here. Many parts of the east are going to see 2 to 4 inches of rain, maybe locally 6 or 8 over parts of Florida and maybe the eastern Carolinas. We also see a chance for 2 to 4 inches of rain here by Monday across Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota. But where you really need the rain, you're not really seeing a lot of it. We may be lucky and get a few heavier storms, but nothing widespread in Illinois, Missouri, and Indiana, as well as northern Kentucky. I was going to check real quick on our plane heading in, and it looks like it is picking up winds, generally speaking, 55 to 60 knots at flight level. So on the northwest side of the storm, we do not have hurricane force winds. We just have winds of 60 or so miles per hour. Thank you so much for your time today. I know this video was long, but I'm going to have more coming for you tomorrow. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. I want to glorify God and thank him for another day, another blessing in my life, the blessing to serve you all. It's my calling as a Christian man to help save lives and to get the word out. And I thank God every day for all the spiritual gifts he's given me. I know I've talked science, but I am a Christian, and that comes first to me. God comes first. And I'm not really going to talk too much more about that, but I did want to bring something up real quick. I was just thinking about how easily it is for people to get offended by viewpoints or things that they don't agree with. I feel like as the world becomes more divided, as more people kind of turn away from God, they see more I don't even know what the right term is, but noise, disagreement, things that offend people. I know there's memes out there that say I'm offended. I have a sense of humor, so obviously I chuckle at that. But honestly, God does not want people to be divided. He wants to bring them together. God is love. God is goodness. However, there is an enemy force out there, and God and God's word and Jesus say in John 10:10, that there's a thief. The thief cometh not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they may have life. That's Jesus says, I am coming so that they may have life and that they might have it more abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. And, you know, things go wrong in the world. People lose lives. People lose property. Crimes are committed. Justice needs to be served. There are violent storms out there. There is an enemy force. But as a Christian man, I've been able to find that no matter what's going on there, rather than being offended, rather than looking for things to offend me, things to upset me, that I need to look to God more and more and to never stop chasing him and his grace. He's given us Jesus Christ, John 3:16, eternal life through the love of Jesus Christ. And rather than letting the thief win here, I'm going to choose God and choose joy and not let the enemy steal my joy. And I pray that he does not steal your joy either. If you have any prayer requests, I love to pray for you. If you're not a believer and you've seen this and maybe this offended you or you didn't agree with it, you know what? That's okay. We're all different and we want to embrace each other's differences, but just know that I'm still praying for you and I want to see you succeed. And I do want to see you turn to God through Jesus Christ. I didn't do that until I was about 30 years old. I lived a life of worldly desires, still struggling with some of those, to be honest with everybody. But know this, I know that God has given me a gift and I need to share it. And I wanted to share that with you today. Hope you have a wonderful day and we'll talk again tomorrow. God bless you.